Begin the Gemara today towards the bottom of Daf Lamed Dalet Amud Beis, where it says Amar Shmuel, 5-6 lines from the bottom of the Amud. So the Gemara here is discussing what is said in the Mishnah when you had the case of the two husbands that they confused the two wives that were also sisters. And then it said in the Mishnah that for 3 months they have to separate from their wives. And then after 3 months they can go back to them. So the Gemara brings over here a discussion about this. Amar Shmuel, Shmuel said, V'kulon tzriches lahamten shleisha chadashim. All of these women that we mentioned here have to wait 3 months. Chutz migiyores u'meshachreres ketana. Besides a giyores or a meshachreres, which is a shifcha kananis that got freed, and she's a ketana. Both of these, they were ketana. They were under the age of bas mitzvah. And then you don't have to wait 3 months after they became freed or became converted to determine if a child that was born is born from before or from after. You don't have to wait for that. Okay, that's the statement that he said. Aval, now, or this is actually part of what Shmuel says. Aval ketana bas Yisrael tzricha lahamtin gemuchadashim. But when it comes to even a ketana, but if she's a bas Yisrael, if she's a yid, she does have to wait 3 months after there was, we'll see, the Gemara will discuss here, after there was some relation with another person, in whatever situation it may be, as the Gemara will discuss in a moment, she will have to wait 3 months even for a ketana. So again, the point over here is to determine who the child that's going to be born later comes from. But so even though we're talking about a ketana, nevertheless, Shmuel is saying that you will have to wait 3 months. Frag the Gemara, so what are we talking about over here? Ubemai. In what case are we saying that a ketana does have to wait 3 months till she could have relations with her husband? If we're talking about a ketana that had a relation with a man, not a relation really, she got married to somebody. This is the case where her brothers or her mother married her off, a kedushin b'derabanan, and now she has the option to leave her husband with miyun, to reject this marriage. So if that's what we're talking about, that she was married and then she was memayin, so in such a case, for Ha'ama Shmuel once said, as the Gemara is going to quote here, that she does not have to wait 3 months after miyun. The gzeira of Chachamim does not apply in this case of miyun. V'i beget, if there was a case where she was married and as a ketana, and her father married her off, it's a real marriage, and she has to have a get to leave her husband. Shmuel once said regarding this case, that in such a case you do have to wait. Even a ketana has to wait 3 months until she would get remarried. Shmuel said, me and a boy, a ketana that rejected her husband and of this marriage, that's only midirabanan, ein etzricha lahamten shleisha chadashim. She does not have to wait 3 months until she gets remarried. No, son lo get, if she was fully married properly, and now she gave her husband a get, tzricha lahamten shleisha chadashim. So she does have to wait 3 months. So why over here is Shmuel saying this halacha again? Says the Gemara, Ela biznus. What are we talking about over here? We're not talking about a ketana that was married, whether married minatayre or married midrabanan. We're talking about a ketana that was mizana, that had a relation with someone out of marriage. And now what's the pshat over here? So why does Shmuel say that for a ketana, even for a ketana, she would have to wait 3 months? V'gazru rabbanon ketana mishum g'dayla. Chachamim decreed that for a ketana she should wait 3 months because not to confuse this with the halacha of a gedayla. In other words, even though a ketana, there's really no reason for her to wait because she can't have any children with the previous relation. So there's no reason to have to determine a child that's born later who it's from. But nevertheless, in order to know clearly the halacha regarding a gedayla, that there is a reason to wait, so they made the same gezeira for a ketana as well. Now Rashi here adds, this whole gezeira though is only for a ketana that's a yid. But when it comes to a ketana, which is also a giyaris or a shifcha that got freed, since that's something that's uncommon, Chachamim do not apply their gezeira to a case that's lo shchicha, that's uncommon. Frag the Gemara, but now migas rinan ketana mishum gedayla. Is this what Shmuel said it true, that you make a gezeira for a ketana as well, because not to confuse it with a gedayla, that even a ketana has to wait as well 3 months? But Vatanan, we learned clearly in the Mishnah before, Imayu Ketanis. The case the Mishnah again was speaking about when you had these two sisters that were married to two brothers, and then they exchanged their wives with one another. So afterwards the Mishnah says you have to wait 3 months. And then the Mishnah adds, Imayu Ketanis. If these two sisters were Ketanis, so then She'enan Ruyis Leilat, because they can't give birth, Machzir and Naisan Miyat, they could immediately return to their husband. So you see that a Ketana does not have to wait. Rav Gidl Amarav, so Rav Gidl Amarav answers, Hayroas Shah Haisa. When it says in the Mishnah that you don't have to wait, that was an instruction that was given for a specific incident that happened at that time, that there was a heta given. But it's unusual. Really, the halacha is that there is a gzeira and you do have to wait, because a ketana could be compared to a gedayla. But in the Mishnah, there was a hirah shah. For a certain reason, for a certain need, the hirah was given that you don't have to wait. So the Gemara questions this interpretation of the Mishnah. Meklal dahavoy? Are you telling me the story the Mishnah speaks about is something that actually happened, and Chachamim gave this hayrah, gave that instruction at that time that this is what should be done, that you don't have to wait for 3 months? So Rashi here says the Gemara doesn't accept this pshat because it's not what it says in the Mishnah. The Mishnah just says the halacha. This is the halacha. The lashon of the Mishnah is im hayu ketanes. If there were ketanes, you don't have to wait. It doesn't say in the Mishnah that there was a ma'aseh, there was a story that happened this way. Ella, the Gemara says ki hayras shah haisa. That story that happened in the Mishnah is a very unusual story, and therefore it's something that's like something that's just happens once in a blue moon. Such a thing could happen, and therefore, and the Gemara explains why, because v'chilof lo yishchiach. The story of the Mishnah, which is that two husbands exchanged their wives with one another, such a thing to happen is extremely unusual, and therefore, in such a case, when it comes to a ketana, Chachama will not geyser that you should have to wait 3 months because it's very unusual. Similar to what Shmuel said, that when you have a ketana and it's a giyaitis or a shifcha, that's also unusual, so therefore, Chachama will not geyser there. But according to this version of what Shmuel said, when it comes to a regular ketana that had a relation with another man, she will have to wait 3 months. Now there's another version of what Shmuel said. Amrila, they said, Shmuel said, Kulan tzrichais lahamten shleisha chadashim. All women that had a relation with someone will have to wait 3 months until they can have a relation or go get remarried to another man. Chutz migiyayres u'mushachreres gedayla. Besides a giyayres or a mushachreres, she's being freed from being a shifcha, even a gedayla, or not even, it doesn't say even, a mugiyayres and a mushachreres gedayla will not have to wait 3 months. That's the statement of Shmuel. So what do we understand from this? Aval, not mashma from what Shmuel said, that Shmuel is speaking only about a woman that's a gedayla. And the Gemara understands that this refers even to the first half of Shmuel's statement. When Shmuel says you have to wait 3 months, that only means a gedayla. Now, just before I go weiter, why b'negeya to a giyayres and a mushachreres gedayla? Why would you not have to wait 3 months to determine the child that's born later, who the child is from? The Gemara will explain soon. But before the Gemara comes to that, the Gemara first discusses the diak of what you see from Shmuel. Aval ketana bas Yisrael, when it comes to a ketana. Not only a ketana that was freed or was converted, even a ketana that's a yid. If she had a relation with another man, she does not have to wait afterwards for 3 months to go and get married or to get remarried. Now, b'mai, what is the case speaking about over here? The Gemara repeats basically same question that we asked before. Are we speaking about a case where she was married midirabanan and now she's rejecting her marriage? Shmuel already said this once before, that a ketana married and she's now rejecting the marriage, she could immediately get remarried. Chacham did not apply their gzeira in this case. If it's talking about a case that she was fully married and she's getting divorced, but didn't Shmuel say the boya? Then in such a case she would have to wait for 3 months. Shmuel, as we quoted before, Shmuel said, "Mi and a boy." If she rejects her husband of this marriage that's only midrabanan, she does not have to wait 3 months to get remarried. Nasan lo get. If her husband gave her a get, she does have to wait for 3 months. So regarding what case is Shmuel here coming and saying that she would not have to wait 3 months? Says the Gemara, Ella biznus. What he's saying is regarding a case, not that she was married to someone, not married, not minatayra, not midarabanan. She just had a relation with someone out of marriage. And over there, Shmuel was saying that she would not have to wait 3 months. Uznos b'ketana loy shchiach. This nos of a ketana is not shchiach. Giyayres. Okay, that's the Gemara's answer. This nos of a ketana is not shchiach. So in other words, in the previous version of Shmuel, he said that only by a ketana, which is also a giyayres or a meshachreres, or was freed, that's not shchiach. There Chachamim did not apply a gzeira. But a ketana, which is a yid, Chachamim did apply the gzeira. And the second version of what Shmuel said over here is, a ketana, any ketana, is not shchiach, that there should be this situation of znus, and therefore Chachama would not geizer the gzeira that after the znus of the ketana she should have to wait 3 months to be able to go and get married. So now the Gemara goes back to the second part of what Shmuel said, that a giyaitis or a meshuchreres, even a gedayla, will not have to wait 3 months until she can get married. Giyaitis and meshuchreres. Now when it comes to a giyaitis, so she was freed, the shchiach v'hu znus. So for them, before they became converted, or before they become a yid, it is common that they should have relations with other men out of marriage. By a guy, it's more of a common thing. So if so, ligzar, why would the gzeira not apply that she should have to wait for 3 months to be able to get married? Answers the Gemara, who the Amak Rabbi Yosi. Shmuel holds like Rabbi Yosi's opinion. The Tanya, we're going to Nebraisa as follows. Hagiyaitis, v'ashvuya. So if you have a giyaitis, she's converted, or a shvuya, she was captured, and then she was freed from captivity, as we see about shivcha, or shivcha shenivtu, shenisgayrev, shenishtachro. They're redeemed, or converted, or freed. So not tzricha islahamting, gimel chadash. Because we're concerned that any of these women had a relation with a man in that situation, so they now have to wait 3 months to be able to determine the child born, who's this child. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yosi disagrees. Rabbi Yosi mate leyaris v'lenasi miyad. Rabbi Yosi allows any of these women to go and get married immediately. And so Shmuel is following Rabbi Yosi's opinion. And now the Gemara here will explain what's the reason for Rabbi Yosi's opinion. Amar Rabbe, so Rabbe says, my time at the Rabbi Yosi, what's the reason for what Rabbi Yosi says? Why aren't we concerned about this nus that could happen before? Why didn't they have to wait? Kosava, Rabbi Yosi holds, Isha mizana, that yet these women take they are mizana, but nevertheless mishameshes b'moich kedei shalei tesaber. A woman in these gayim or these situations that we're speaking about, they're mizana. They are mizana. They have relations with a man in a way that they should not become pregnant. They use some kind of a cloth not to become pregnant. So therefore, there's no reason to wait 3 months to determine who the child is, because they will not become pregnant. That was the reason that Rabbi explained. Oh, Malay Abaye. So Abaye asks on Rabbi on the reason that he just gave. Now, the basis of Abaye's question is going to be that what the Gemara is describing over here is that they make sure not to become pregnant. But how do they make sure not to become pregnant? They have to have a piece of cloth, something to use not to be pregnant. Now, that's something that takes a bit of a tircha. You have to sort of be prepared for that. You have to have it available for you. So Abaye says, not in all situations could you rely on and be so sure that they're using this moich, this cloth, not to become pregnant. It would be understood regarding a giyaitis why you're relying on this, that she used something not to become pregnant. Kivin the daita legiyuri, because she already, if we see she became a giyaitis, so she probably already had it in the plan to become a giyaitis, mintra nafsha. So even if she's having still relations with other men, but nevertheless she's going to be careful with herself, kidei lahavchin, in order to be able to distinguish bein zera shenizra b'kedusha, a child that's born. You should know that this child that's born comes from after she became already a giyaitis, or bein zera shenizra shalei b'kedusha, or if the child was born from before she became a giyaitis. So we could expect Taka that she would already be prepared for this, and she's already careful, and she has something like a contraceptive. She has this cloth to be careful that she shouldn't become pregnant. That's understood. Shvuya v'shivcha nami. We could say a similar thing regarding a woman that's been captured, or a woman that's a shivcha. So we could also say that they're sort of prepared for this. The shami mimarayu, because they already heard from their master that they're going to be freed. They're aware of what's going on. So mimtri nafshay. So they can be prepared and they're careful with themselves. But Elo, how about a situation where a shivcha gets freed suddenly, and she was not prepared for this? She wasn't thinking that she's going to become freed. So what case is that? One of the cases that a shivcha kananis is freed from her master is if her master knocks out a tooth or knocks out an eye, one of the 24 limbs that if he knocks out and now she becomes freed, that's something that happens suddenly. So over here, how could you expect that she would have a moich, she would have something prepared that she should not become pregnant? If she becomes freed suddenly, shouldn't we be concerned that maybe she had a relation with someone else and she became pregnant and now she should have to wait for 3 months? So how could Rabbi say this is the reason for Rabbi Yosi? If you're going to argue and say, maybe in this case Rabbi Yosi agrees. Maybe in such a case where she becomes freed suddenly and automatically because her husband knocked out a tooth or an eye, in such a case Rabbi Yosi would agree that she does have to wait 3 months. But that's not true, because Vatnan, or the Gersa here is Vatanya, we learned in the Braise, Anusa Umafute. So the halacha of an Anusa or Mafute, whether they were coerced into this Znus or Mafute, persuaded, Tzricha Lahamtin, Gimel Chadashim. You have to wait 3 months to know who the child born later is. And this is talking even about a Yisraelis. We're not talking about a case of a guy. So that's Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Rabbi Yosi, Mate li'aris v'lenasim miyad. Rabbi Yosi says even regarding an anusa and a mafuta, they're allowed to go and get married immediately. So what do we see over here? Even regarding in a case of an anusa, where this is not something that a woman already has in mind, she has a reason of why she would want a contraceptive. She would want to do something to stop pregnancy. But this is something that happens suddenly. Nevertheless, Rabbi Yosi says, even in such a case, we should be concerned that she would become pregnant, we still allow her to get married immediately. So there has to be some other reasoning for what Rabbi Yosi said. So therefore Abaye says, Elam Abaye. So Abaye answers, according to another version of it, it's Rabbi that said, Isha Mizana, a woman that is Mizana, that has relations out of marriage, and she does not want to become pregnant. So what she does is misapeches shalei tisaber. She turns over in order that the zera that enters into her body should not be absorbed and that she should not become pregnant. Now this is something, even if it happens suddenly and you don't plan and don't know about this in advance, this is something that you can do not to become pregnant. And therefore, it answers the question we asked before. We were making a distinction between a woman that knows in advance or doesn't. No, even if she doesn't know in advance, misapeches, she turns over not to become pregnant. That's the basis of the opinion of Rabbi Yosi. And therefore Rabbi Yosi's opinion is that this is not only benegay to a guy, even a Yisraelis. If there's a case that a znus happened, we don't have to have her wait for 3 months, because we can rely on the fact that she probably did something not to become pregnant. That's Rabbi Yosi's opinion. Now, Shmuel does not exactly fully agree to Rabbi Yosi. Rashi points out over here, Shmuel said his halacha, and earlier in the sugya, Rashi points out that Shmuel said his halacha only regarding a guy that became a giyaitis. Only in such a case that Shmuel say that we're not concerned that she became pregnant. B'negeya to a Yisraelis, Shmuel's opinion is that because by a Yisraelis, when she's married, and now she gets divorced or her husband dies, she has to wait 3 months, Chachamim were geyser that even by znus for a Yisraelis you also have to wait 3 months. But b'negei to a giyaitis, so based on the svara the Gemara said before, by a giyaitis there's a unique svara that she's already planning and becoming a giyaitis, and therefore over there we can be sure that she doesn't want to become pregnant. Whether it's a relation with znus or even if it's with marriage. But because she knows she's becoming a giyaitis, she does not want to become pregnant at that point. So only over there Shmuel held that they weren't geyser. Now the Gemara just explains over here the other opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda says that even regarding a case of znus, or even regarding a giyaitis and a shvuya and a shivcha, you do have to wait 3 months. Why? Isn't this svara a very logical svara? We should be able to rely on the fact that a woman that's having a relation out of marriage makes sure that she should not become pregnant. Says the Gemara, not necessarily. Maybe even if she does turn over and she tries not to get pregnant, but maybe it wasn't done well enough, maybe still the zera would be absorbed and she would become pregnant. We have to be concerned for that. Okay, going back now to the Mishnah. What did it say in the Mishnah? The last statement of the last Mishnah of this Perek was regarding the case over here of these women that got exchanged with their husbands and that they can go back to their husband afterwards. So the Mishnah concluded, if this happened when they got exchanged and they were kayanais, so then nifsulu min akohuna. They become puzzle of going back to their husbands, which are kayanim. So the Gemara asks on this, kayanais in. This is only if they were kayanais. These women were kayanais, but Yisraelis lie. But if they were Yisraelis, and this happened to them, that they got exchanged with their husbands and they had relations with, as an Eishes Ish, with someone that's not their husband, so then they could go back to their husband that's a kayan. How could you say this? So Rashi explains, the Gemara's question is that the halacha regarding a kayan is, if his wife has married him, his wife, which is an Eishes Ish, has a relation with someone else, doesn't matter if it was done b'mezid or even b'shegig or even b'aynis, once she has a relation with someone else, she can't go back to her husband. Not only if her wife is a kohenes, any wife, even if her wife is a Yisraeli, she can't go back to her husband. Why does it say in the Mishnah a kohenes? Says the Gemara, Eime, so you have to read the Mishnah, Im hayu nishei kayanim. If any of these women that we're speaking about in the Mishnah, so they were the wives of kayanim, so then the wife of a kayan that had a relation as Eishes Ish with someone else, which is what happened here in the Mishnah, they can't go back to their husband. But the Gemara is still not happy with this pshat. Fragt the Gemara, nishei kayanim in, so you're telling me that only if while they were married to a kayan, and then they had a relation with someone else as an Eishes Ish, then this applies that they can't go back to her husband. But nishei Yisraelim loy. If it was while these women were married to a Yisrael, to a regular Yid, and then they had a relation with an Eishes Ish, then if they got divorced from this husband, they would be allowed to go back, or they would be allowed to go and get married to a Kayan. That's what it's mashma from a Mishnah. Only because they were married to Kayanim now. But if they're married to a Yisrael and they had a relation with someone else as an Eishes Ish, later they would be able to go and get married to a Kayan. But is that true? Rav Amram said that that's not the halacha. Ha milsa, the following halacha, Amalan Rav Sheshes. Rav Sheshes told us, Van herinu le'einen mimas nissen. And he illuminated our eyes. In other words, he brought us a raya from a Mishnah. What is this halacha? That Eishes Yisrael, a woman, she's married to a Yisrael. So she's a Yisraelis. He's a Yisrael, Shanansa. And during that time of marriage, she's an Eishes Ish, she was forced into a relation with someone else out of the marriage. Afal Pisha Muteres Labaila, she is allowed to go back to her husband because her husband is a Yisrael, but Psula Lekahona, she would be possible to get married to a Kayan. So if her husband dies and then she later wants to get married to a Kayan, the fact that she had a relation with someone as an Eishes Ish previously, so she's not allowed to get married to a Kayan later. So why is it saying in our Mishnah, we're changing the Girsa, and we're saying that in our Mishnah, Nishei Kayanim, only if she had a relation with someone else as an Eishes Ish, when she was married to a Kayan, is it an issue? It's mashma, if she's married to a Yisrael, it's not an issue. Well, that's not true. Amar Rave, so Rave changes the pshat in our Mishnah. Hachi ka'amar, this is how you have to read our Mishnah. Im ayu Kayanais, nesuais li Yisrael, if the case over here is that these are Kayanais, these are women that are Kayanais, and they're not even married to a Kayan, they're married to a Yisrael. Nifsalu minatrume de beinashayu. If they had a relation with someone when they were an Eishes Ish, then if they would return back to their father's house, which is a Kayan, they would become puzzled to eat from the trumah. What is this talking about? This is going to be later in the Masechta. Rashi explains what this means. Usually, the halacha of a kohenes is when she gets married to a Yisrael, she can't anymore eat from the trumah of her father's house. But what happens if her husband passed away and she had no children, and now she goes back to her father's house? Now she could return to eat trumah from her father, which is a kain. But if, now this is what our Mishnah is telling us here, if while she was married to this Yisrael, so even though she didn't have any children, but she went and she was mizana with someone as an Eishes Ish, here, even if her husband dies and she goes back to her father's house, which is a kayin, she will not be able to eat truma. That's how you read our Mishnah. So if she was a kohenes, nifsalu min truma, that she will not be able to eat the truma from her father's house. Hadran Allah arba ache. This is the conclusion of the third Masechta, of the third Pedic, that is, of Masechta Yevamos. Okay, we still have a way to go for the Masechta. Yeah. Okay, let's begin the fourth Pedic of Masechta Yevamos. The Mishnah begins with the halacha of chalitza and yibum. So as we know, the halacha of chalitza and yibum only applies in a case when a person passes away without children. What happens if he passes away and he had no children, and then after chalitza or yibum is done, all of a sudden you see that his wife is pregnant. What do you do now? Zok the Mishnah, ha'chaylitz liyavimtay. So a person goes and does yibum, or chalitza that is, for the yevamah. And now v'nimtzis mu'beres. Now she's found to be pregnant. And v'yolda. And she actually gave birth. So now what's the story with this chalitza? Bizman shavlat shakayama. So if that child she gave birth to is a viable child, so then hu muta b'kroivay. He is allowed to go get married to any of her relatives. V'hi muteres b'kroivav. She's allowed to get married to any of his relatives. The chiddush over here is, even though usually when you do chalitza for a woman, so there's a halacha midrabanan that after you did that chalitza, you're not allowed to get married to any of her relatives, and she's not allowed to get married to any of your relatives. Similar to the halacha of a grusha. After you divorce a wife, you're not allowed to get married to any of her relatives. But over here, in this case, the chalitza was not a chalitza. It's nothing. Why not? Because you see that she had a child. So the chalitza was not necessary b'chlal. And also, v'loi pasla min ha'kohuna. This chalitza does nothing to passel her from getting married to a kayin as well. Otherwise, midrabanan, a chalutza is not let her get married to a kain. But this is not a chalitza at all. Ein avlat shel kayama, but if the child that was born did not survive, it was a nafil, she miscarried, or died before 30 days, so then, who is aser b'krevei? That's what it means. Okay, Al-Kapanim, the child is not shel kayam, it's not a viable child. Who aser b'krevei se'ah, v'hi asura b'krevav. So then, the mitzvah of yibum or chalitza still applies, and therefore he would be aser to get married to her relatives, she's aser to get married to his relatives, and psula min hakohuna, or pasla min hakohuna. She is a chalutza now, and she can't get married to any kainim. Similar halacha b'negei to if the yavam went and did yibum for the yavama. Hakainis is yivimtoi. Person goes ahead and gets married. He does yibum for the yavama, thinking that she had no children. Her husband had no children. And then v'nimtzas mu'beres. And now afterwards you see that she's pregnant. V'yolda, and she gave birth. So again, a similar halacha applies. Bisman shavlat shel kayama. If the child is a viable child, so yaitzi, he has to send her away. He has to give her a get. He's not allowed to be married to her. Now it's Eishes Och. This is her husband, her brother's wife, which is also for you to get married. If there's no mitzvah of yibum here. The chayavim bekarban. Not only that, they're both chayav to bring a carbon chatos because they were over on this erva of Eishes Och b'shaygig. V'emein vlad. If it's again v'emein vlad shel kayama, and if the child born is not viable, so then yekayim. Then he could stay married to her. The mitzvah of yibum is properly done. Safik ben tishal rishain and safik ben shival achran. If she becomes pregnant and a baby is born and they did not wait the 3 months in between, you're supposed to wait before you do the yibum. So now when the baby is born, you're not sure if this is a child that was born from the previous marriage after 9 months of pregnancy or after this marriage after 7 months of pregnancy. Yaitzi, so he has to send her away because he's not sure if he can remain married to her. But vavlat kosher. The child is a kosher child. Either the child, we don't know who's his father, but the child either way is a kosher child. The chayavim ba'ashem tali. And they're chayiv to bring a ashem tali, which is brought when you were over on an aveda, and with a suffix, if you over this aveda, so you bring an ashem tali. That's the Mishnah. Because Mimanav Shach, though, the Vlad is kosher. That's what Rashi here says. Huh? Okay, let's see weiter in the Gemara. So the Gemara, itmer. So we learned the following machloikis between Rabbi Yechon and Reish Lakish. Achayletz lemu'uberes. A person that does chalitza, and the chalitza turns out to be while she was pregnant, like the case that the Mishnah spoke about. And then vihipila, and then she miscarried. So it turns out that the chalitza was actually a good chalitza because she miscarried. But during the time of the chalitza, she was a mu'beres, she was pregnant. Rabbi Yechanan says that chalitza is a perfect chalitza, and she does not need the chalitza repeated again by any of the other brothers. Reish Lakish says, yes, Taka, she's a woman that miscarried and therefore her husband had no children, so she would need chalitza, but the first chalitza that was done during the time when she was pregnant is not good, and therefore she is going to need another chalitza from one of the brothers. So the Gemara, Rabbi Yechanan says you don't need another chalitza from the brother. Why? Chalitza is me'uberes, shma chalitza. The chalitza that was done at that time of pregnancy, and later it turns out that she miscarried, it's a good chalitza. Ubiyas me'uberes, shma biyah. And the same thing also with the yibum. If you would marry her for the yibum at the time when she was pregnant, that biyah counts for the mitzvah of yibum. He does not have to have another relation with her to fulfill that mitzvah. But Reish Lakish disagrees. You're going to have to redo the chalitza again because chalitza is me'uberes leishma chalitza. Chalitza done while she was pregnant, even though later it turns out that the pregnancy she was carried, but if that at that time she was a mu'beres, the mitzvah of chalitza is not good. Or the same thing, ubiyas me'uberes leishma biyah. The relation he had for her to fulfill the mitzvah of yibum is not the mitzvah of biyah. So the Gemara now explains, b'maika miflagi, what is the basis of their machlaikis? Either they're arguing about a pasik, or svara, or if you want, I can tell you, they're arguing about a pasik. Or svara, that is. They're arguing about a svara logically. If you want, I'll tell you, they're arguing about a svara. Rabbi Yechanan says as follows. If Eliyahu would come along and tell you right now, when she's pregnant, Again, he'll tell you the abra mapuli mapla, that even though she's pregnant now, but you should know she will miscarry. Mi lav bas chalitza v'yibumi. Is she not at this point, even though right now she is pregnant, is she not fit for the mitzvah of chalitza or yibum? Because we know the future that even though she's pregnant, but she will miscarry. So in such a case, if Eliyahu Hanavi will tell you this, you will say that the yibum or chalitza done is good. So hashta nami, so over here as well, even though you don't know the future, you don't have Eliyahu Hanavi telling you this, but tegali milsa l'mafreya, once she does miscarry, shouldn't that reveal retroactively that this is the fact? That even though she was pregnant before, but she was going to miscarry, and therefore the chalitza and yibum, even done while she's pregnant, is a good yibum and chalitza. That's Reb Brechinen. Rish Lakish says, Tegale milsa l'mafreya lo yamrinon. No, he doesn't hold of this concept that you say that this reveals retroactively that not that she miscarried, so therefore the whole pregnancy was not a pregnancy, and therefore the chalitza and yibum was good. It doesn't. He says, Taisus here explains, the Rishayim explain, there's no reason to say that it, according to him, that it should go back l'mafreya. This is a new development. When she was pregnant, so then at that point she was pregnant with a child that potentially could have been a viable child. Later that she miscarried, that's a new development. So therefore only later does she become fit for Yibum and Chalitza, but not during the time of the pregnancy. Or if you want, I'll tell you, Kro. They're arguing about the Pasuk. Rabbi Yechanan says, when the Pasuk says that only if there's no children, then the mitzvah of Yibum applies, so what does the Pasuk say? Uven ein loy, that he had no children. Amar Rachmana, that's what the Pasuk says. V'holeslei. So at the time when she's still pregnant, so she had no children at that point, and later we see she miscarried and she has no viable child. So therefore, the pasuk uven ein lo is fulfilled, and therefore the yibum chalitza, even at the time when she was pregnant, is a good yibum chalitza. Rish Lakish says, uven ein lo. How do you read the pasuk ein lo? It's written with an extra yud here. It could have been written without a yud. We had this before in the Gemara. Ayin olav. Ein lo means ayin olav. You have to analyze and look deeper to see whether there can be a potential for a child here. So at the time of pregnancy, when then there could be a potential for a child born, the yibum and the chalitza are not good. That's the machlekes. So now the Gemara comes back to our Mishnah and asks the question on Rabbi Yechanan, or Rabbi Yechanan asks on Rish Lakish, and then Rish Lakish will ask on Rabbi Yechanan from what it says in our Mishnah. What did it say in our Mishnah? That the Mishnah spoke about this very case. A person that did chalitza or yibum for his wife. The Gemara is going to start with the case of chalitza. He did chalitza for his wife and for this yevame, and then it turns out she was pregnant. So the Mishnah said, if the child born was not viable, so hu asu b'kreiv he asura b'kreivav. So he's going to be aser with her relatives, and she's going to be aser with his relatives. Upasla min kahuna, and he passes her for the kahuna. So the question over here is, why is this ta'alacha? This is well understood according to my opinion. What did I say? So Rabbi Yechanan is telling Rish Lakish, what's my opinion? Chalitza mu'beres, shma chalitza. The chalitza of a mu'beres is a good chalitza. Mishum hachi pasla. So therefore he passes her for kahuna. But according to your opinion, you say that the chalitza of a mu'beres is not a good chalitza b'chlal. Amai pasla mana kahuna. So then why does he passel her for the kahuna? In such a case, even though the vlad is not shal kayama, and so therefore l'chayra, now we can see retroactively that it was a good yibum or a good chalitza, but according to Rish Lakish, if the chalitza and the yibum is done during the time when she's pregnant, it's nothing. So why does the Mishnah say that in such a case she's passeled from the kahuna? Rish Lakish answers, mid rabbanon ulechumre. The halacha of our Mishnah that should we be passeled from kahuna is only mid rabbanon. It's a stringency in order not to confuse this case of chalitza with a case where it's an actual good chalitza and you would be passeled for kahuna. Ulechumre ba'alma. So it's only a chumre. This is one version of this question here that Rabbi Yechanan is the one that asked the question on Rish Lakish from our Mishnah. Now, there's another version here. Ikidamri, others say, Eisver Rish Lakish le Rabbi Yechanan. Rish Lakish is the one that asked on Rabbi Yechanan from our Mishnah. What did it say in our Mishnah? Ein avlat shel kayam. It turns out that the child is not a viable child. So then the chalitza was a good chalitza. So therefore, hu asa b'kreiv yisav, he asa b'kreivav. They're forbidden to one each other's relatives. Upaslo menak kahuna. And she's puzzled to get married to a kohen. So now Rabbi Reish Lakish, according to this version, is going to focus on this lashon that it says here. Pasla min kahuna, that he passes her from kahuna. So it says Reish Lakish, Bishloi milididi, it's well understood according to me, that what I say is, chalitzas mu'uberes loishma chalitza. That really, min ha-Torah, this chalitza is b'chlal not a good chalitza. So that explains the language of the Mishnah. Therefore the Mishnah says that she becomes pasul from kahuna. Why is the Mishnah focusing on this aspect? That she becomes pasul to kahuna? L'chumra. That's an chumra midrabanan, that she would become pasul to kahuna even though the chalitza really was not a good chalitza. And v'loi katani, the Mishnah does not use a language which is more direct and clear, that einot tzricha chalitza menachin, that she does not require to do chalitza a second time from the other brothers. In other words, this is the main diakir of Reish Lakish. Why does the Mishnah not say a more clear language? That in such a case, the chalitza is a good chalitza and therefore she does not require a second chalitza. It doesn't say that. Because really she wouldn't require a second chalitza. The only thing the Mishnah says is there should be pasul from kahuna. It's saying that because that's exerim midrabanan. But according to Rabbi Yechanan, why does the Mishnah not say a clearer lashon that in such a case, because the first chalitza is good, she would not need a second chalitza? So Rabbi Yechanan answered to this question, Enochanami, you're right, the Mishnah should have said that expression here, but v'aidi detana reisha loy pasla, because in the reisha it cannot use this expression. Over there it can't say ein tzricha chalitza menachin, because over there it's a case where the chalitza that was done the first time is not a good chalitza. So over there it says the lashon that she does not become pasul. So over there. Again, so if I did the Tana Reisha loy pasla, so because in the Reisha it uses the term loy pasla, that she does not become pasla from the Kainim, Tana Sefer pasla. So therefore it uses the same language in the Sefer that she becomes pasla to the Kainim, even though it could have used a stronger and more clear lashon to say that she does not need chalitza from the brothers. Okay, now the Gemara will basically repeat the same question of Rabbi Yechanan on Reish Lakish, or according to another version, the question of Reish Lakish and Rabbi Yechanan from the next part of the Mishnah, when he did yibum for her when she was mu'beres. So Rabbi Yechanan asked Reish Lakish the question. What does it say in the Mishnah? That he did yibum, and then you see that she was pregnant, but the child was not viable. Yikayim. So the language the Mishnah uses is yikayim. He can remain married to her. So now, first the Gemara will explain what Rabbi Yechanan asked on Reish Lakish. According to my opinion, Rabbi Yechanan says, I say chalitza mu'beres shma chalitza. The chalitza when she was pregnant is a good chalitza. Ubias mu'beres shma bia. And also if he had a relation with her to do the mitzvah of yibum is a good bia. That's why the Mishnah uses the term yikayim. What does yikayim mean? At this point the Gemara understands yikayim means just remain married to her. There's nothing that you don't have to do the bia over again to do the mitzvah. The mitzvah is done. You can remain married to her. According to Reish Lakish, both the chalitza or the bia at the time when she was pregnant is not good, so the Mishnah should have used a different term. The Mishnah should say clearly that he has to do the bia over again in order to do the mitzvah again. The mitzvah done the first time was not good. So Reish Lakish answers to this, Ma Yikayim, when the Mishnah uses the term Yikayim, that's what it means. Yachzar v'yival v'yikayim, that he has to go and do the bia again for the mitzvah, and then he remains married to her, D'loi sagi, because what he did before is not enough, because that was the time when she was a mu'beres. That's the first version, so it was Rabbi Yechanan that asked the question on Reish Lakish. Others say, Reish Lakish Rabbi Yechanan. Reish Lakish asked a question to Rabbi Yechanan from the Mishnah. When the Mishnah said that he did a yibum when she was mu'beres and then the child born was not viable, yikayim. So the Mishnah uses the term yikayim. What does yikayim mean? Now the Gemara is going to start with the opposite approach. Reish Lakish says, according to me, it's understood whether chalitza or bia in a time when she was pregnant is not a good bia. That's what the Mishnah uses, this term yikayim, which means, according to Reish Lakish, yachzar v'yival v'yikayim. the term Yekayim means that he has to have a bia again for the mitzvah, and that's how he could be Mekaymer. It's not going to be enough if he doesn't have another bia with her, because he has to do the mitzvah again. But according to you, according to Rabbi Yechanan, that says that the mitzvah is done already. Why does the Mishnah use the term Yekayim, which sounds like it's commanding you that you have to go and do this? According to you, according to Rabbi Yechanan, the Mishnah should have said, Ratza Yaitzi, Ratza Yekayim Mibayale. Since according to you the mitzvah is done already, so it's his choice. He doesn't have to remain married to her anymore. If he wants, he can remain married to her. If he wants, he could divorce her, he could send her away, divorce her. So why does the Mishnah use the term Yekayim? So Rabbi Yechanan answers, Enochanami, you're right, that would have been the more correct language for the Mishnah to use. But I did the Tana Reisha Yaitzi, because in the Reisha it uses the term Yaitzi when she does have a viable child. So now he can't remain married to her. It's not an option. There's no mitzvah of Yibamur. So over here it says Yaitzi, Tani Nami Seife Yekayim. So therefore in the Seife as well, it uses this term of Yekayim, even though this term of Yekayim is Lav Dafke, because he already fulfilled the mitzvah properly, even during the time when she was Mu'beres. Meisvei, the Gemara now brings another brayse, says a question on, I believe it's a question on Rabbi Yechanan. Let's see. He does Yibum and he finds that his wife was pregnant. So now that Tzara, the other wife, is not allowed to get married to anybody after this happened. Why? So the lashon of the brayse is Shema Yehei Yavlad Ben Kayama, because maybe the child that will be born will be a viable child. That's the lashon that it says in the brayse. So the Gemara immediately asks, this doesn't make sense. Adarabah. On the contrary, Ki hava avlad ben kayama, if the child that's born ends up being a viable child, so then mifter tzarasa. So then the tzara is potter from any yibum. That means that there's a child there. So there's no mitzvah of yibum at all. Why does the brayse say the tzara has to wait and she can't go get married because maybe the child would be a ben kayama? Ella, says the Gemara, Amos, so you have to amend the brayse and read as follows. Shema lo yehi vlad ben kayama. You have to wait and see, because maybe the child will not be a viable child, and then the mitzvah of yibum would still apply. Now what do you see from this? This is a question of Rabbi Yechanan. If, according to Rabbi Yechanan, when you do the mitzvah of Yibum the bia, while the woman was mu'beres, and later the child that was born was not viable, so that's a good bia, that's fulfillment of the mitzvah. Why should the tzara not go and get married immediately? To pater b'bia shechaverta. Let her become pater with the mitzvah that the other wife already fulfilled. If the child born is going to be viable, for sure there's no mitzvah of Yibum. Let her go get married. If the child that's born is not viable, and there was a mitzvah of Yibum, so her chaver, the other wife, already fulfilled the mitzvah of Yibum. So this proves that what Rabbi Yechanan said is not true. A bia that was done at the time when she was mu'beres is not a good mitzvah of Yibum, of bia. So therefore, the tzara has to wait until the mitzvah will be fulfilled. So because of this brayse, Abaye Taki says that Taki, what we said before, is not true. When it comes to the Yibum, during the time when this woman was pregnant, nobody will disagree. That bia during the time of this Ibor, when she was Mu'beres, it will not pater her from the mitzvah. They're only arguing regarding chalitza. Rabbi Yechanan's opinion is chalitzas mu'beres shma chalitza. The chalitza of a mu'beres is considered to be a chalitza. Chalitza's bia, again, bias mu'beres, lo shma bia. But the bia, the relation, the mitzvah of Yibum during the time when she was mu'beres, that's not considered to be a mitzvah. Rish Lakish's opinion is bias mu'beres lo shma bia. The mitzvah of the bia of the Yibum is not a mitzvah while she's mu'beres, and the same chalitzas mu'beres lo shma chalitza, and the chalitza is also not a chalitza. So regarding the bia, they're not arguing about. They're only arguing regarding the chalitza at the time when she was mu'beres, if it's going to be a good chalitza or not. That's Rava's nupshat in the Gemara, nupshat in this machlokes here. So Rava asks in this and says, how could you make this distinction? Amalei Rava manavshach. Either way, you can't separate the halacha of the Yibum and the halacha of the Chalitza from one another. Why? If at this time when she is pregnant, the Yibum is good, then Chalitza Mu'beres Shma Chalitza. The Chalitza should also be good at that time. If at that time when she's Mu'beres, the mitzvah of the Yibum is not a good mitzvah, so then Chalitza Mu'beres Nami Lo Shma Chalitza. Then the Chalitza should not be a mitzvah as well. Why? The Hakaim alone, we have the following rule, which which we had a few times before in the Masechta. Chala ayla leyibam, ayla lechalitze. When you have a woman that's available, that you can fulfill the mitzvah of Yibum, so then you have an option also to do Chalitza, but v'chal she'ein ayla liyibum, if this is a woman in a situation where the mitzvah of Yibum does not apply, ein ayla l'chalitza. You can't apply the mitzvah of Chalitza either. So over here, if she's a mu'beres, and you're telling me there's no mitzvah of Biyah, there should be no mitzvah of Chalitza either. So therefore, Rava disagrees with this pshat. We'll have to see the continuation in Mitzvah Shem tomorrow.